Hello everyone, Old Boy here. Fulcher, Croiso, welcome back to the channel. Today we're picking up the thread once again of the Phoenicians in the British Isles, and this is going to be episode 4, and we're going to be looking at a little bit of archaeological evidence. Okay, so to get started, we're looking at this Carthaginian coin, which was found in Salford in 2015. Now Salford, I've marked it on the map there, you can see it's close to Bristol, Bath, it's near the Bristol Channel. And you can see just in the bottom left-hand corner of that photo, you can see the Scilly Isles, just off the southwest coast of Britain there. And obviously we know these traders were following coastlines. They would sail close to the coast and they would follow it along to get to where they were going to. So it's not too much of a stretch to think that if they were potentially in the Scilly Isles or Cornwall, that they would just continue following with that coast to the right hand, sailing northeast up towards the Bristol Channel. So you'll see on one side of the coin you've got the profile of a woman's head. On the other side you've got the profile of a horse, and we're going to look a little bit more into that now. So this is the news article that was written by the Daily Mail back in 2015. The headline says, Britain's ancient connection to Carthage, 2,300-year-old coin reveals Mediterranean trade route dating back to the Iron Age. And this is what the article has to say. Quote, "It may look like a misshapen disc of metal, but this coin is one of the oldest ever to be found in Britain. The tiny copper coin, which is smaller than a penny, dates from the Iron Age almost 2,300 years ago and suggests that there were links between the southwest of England and the Mediterranean. It was found in silt after the River Avon burst its banks between Bristol and Bath. On the one side there is a horse's head, while the other bears the image of the goddess Tanit, the chief deity of Carthage. Experts have dated the coin to between 300 and 264 BC and say it came from the western Mediterranean, probably Sardinia or ancient Carthage. The find suggests that the village of Salford, where it was found, was on a major trade route long before Roman times. It is believed there was a ford in the area, which made it the only place to cross the River Avon at the time. The coin is thought to be the oldest datable evidence of human activity found in Salford and the west of England. It suggests Iron Age links between the Mediterranean and the Bristol Channel, which the River Avon flows into around 15 miles, which is 24 kilometres away. Professor David Mattingly, an archaeologist and Roman historian at the University of Leicester, said, "It's really interesting to have a Carthaginian coin in Britain. Suppose that the coin was deposited close to its minting. At that time there were no coins being used in Britain. It would have been quite alien to people. We are very sure that horses were important at the time, so that may have invoked a lot of interest back then. It's a very interesting find." Phil Harding of the Salford Environment Group said that the coin's significant because it's one of the oldest coins ever to be found in England. "Only 8 of these have ever been found, always on ancient trade routes," he said. "We can't believe it. We thought we would be writing the history of Salford from the Roman times to now, but now we have to go back to the Iron Age. It's absolutely fantastic," end quote. So yeah, a lot of the history that they teach, basically all the history starts with the Romans. There was nothing here, there was just barbarians grunting and living in caves. But more and more is showing that really wasn't the case. I mean, you look at the Laten shield that was found in Pocklington, the craftsmanship and the designs, absolutely stunning even to this day. So I think we can safely say, history didn't just start with the Roman invasion of Britain for sure. Now these coins are very interesting as well because, as the article mentioned, coins weren't in use at the time that this coin was minted. So if it was lost in the river close to the time it was minted, then it would have been quite a rarity in Britain, as I say, coins weren't being used at that time. So anything else to indicate this trade route? Well, I found out that there was a gold cup found in Cornwall and some beads that were found on the Scilly Isles, which have puzzled historians for a long time. So this excerpt comes from a paper that I found. It was written by R.D. Penn-Hallerick and it's called Ancient and Medieval Coins from Cornwall and Scilly. And here's what it has to say. Quote, "The occurrence of ancient Greek coins in Britain constitutes a problem which has vexed archaeologists for many years. The Greeks never established trading colonies in the country. Even though it was once fashionable to speculate that as early as the Bronze Age the Mycenaeans may have done so to account for such finds as the gold cup at Rillerton in Cornwall and faience beads from a number of localities, including Nacky Boy entrance grave on St Martin's, Scilly, which closely resemble beads from the eastern Mediterranean. After the founding of the Greek colony of Massalia, which is modern-day Marseille, around 600 BC, there was a trade link between Cornwall and her tin supplies and the Mediterranean. End quote. So is there any other evidence which is indicative of this type of trade? Well, as I covered in the origin story of the Irish and Scots video, there was a Barbary ape skull found in Ireland. It was dated to around 390 to 20 BC, and at the time these Barbary apes were confined to North Africa and Gibraltar, so it certainly indicates trade going on from those regions to Ireland. I've already read out the article. I'll leave it up on the screen for you though, or you can go and check out the origin mythology of the Irish and Scots to check that out there. Okay, anything else? Well, it actually turns out the Nebra Sky Disc, which was found in Germany, when they've done tests on it, it actually shows that the tin came from Cornwall. So we're going to have a look at that now. So just to read out a bit of background information about the Nebra Sky Disc, just if there's anybody out there that hasn't heard of it or is unaware of it, I'm just going to read out some background information just off Wikipedia. So the Nebra Sky Disc is a bronze disc of around 30 centimetres, which is 12 inches in diameter, and has a weight of 2.2 kg, which is 4.9 pounds. Having a blue-green patina and inlaid with gold symbols. These symbols are interpreted generally as the sun or full moon, a lunar crescent, and stars, including a cluster of 7 stars interpreted as the Pleiades. 2 golden arcs along the sides, interpreted to mark the angle between the solstices, were added later. A final addition was another arc at the bottom with interlineal parallel lines, which is usually interpreted as a solar boat with numerous oars, though some authors have also suggested that it may represent a rainbow or the aurora borealis. The disc was found buried on the Mittelberg Hill near Nebra in Germany. It is dated by archaeologists to between 1800 and 1600 BCE and attributed to the early Bronze Age Unitis culture. Various scientific analysis of the disc, the items found with the disc and the find spot have confirmed the early Bronze Age dating. The Nebra Sky Disc features the oldest concrete depiction of astronomical phenomena known from anywhere in the world. In June 2013, it was included in the UNESCO Memory of the World Register and termed one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. Axes and swords found buried with the disc can be dated typologically to between 1700 and 1500 BCE. Remains of birch bark found in the sword hilts have been radiocarbon dated to between 1600 and 1560 BCE, confirming this estimate. This corresponds to the date of burial, at which time the disc had likely been in existence for several generations. Analyses of metal radioactivity and the corrosion layer on the disc further support the early Bronze Age dating. According to an initial analysis of trace elements by X-ray fluorescence by E. Pernica, then at the University of Freiburg, the copper originated at Bischofshofen in Austria, whilst the gold was thought to be from the Carpathian Mountains. A more recent analysis found that the gold used in the first development phase was from the River Carnon in Cornwall, United Kingdom. The tin present in the bronze was also of Cornish origin. End quote. Okay, so there you go. When they tested it, the gold and the tin were both from Cornwall. And I've just left the articles up on the screen there, so you can follow the links. You can go and read the papers there, which show this to be the case. And the fact that this was found in Germany, that would be indicative of the overland trade routes that they had. So apparently the Britons would mine it. They would meet up somewhere, possibly St Michael's Mount or Scilly Isles. They would meet up with merchant traders. They would ship it across the channel to Brittany. They would then send the tin overland to these different areas. Now, anything else? It would be great if we had an eyewitness account. Well, actually, there was a navigator and geographer called Pitheus, who in around 300 BC actually documented travel to the British Isles and possibly even as far as Scandinavia. Now, I'm just going to read out from Britannica some information about Pitheus, just to give you some background information. And then what we're going to do is we're going to read out some of his account via somebody else, because apparently a lot of his original documentation was lost, However, we can learn about him and his journey through other writers who wrote about him in the periods after the journey took place. So that's what we're going to do. So here's what Britannica has to say anyway about Pitheus. Pitheus, navigator, geographer, astronomer, and the first Greek to visit and describe the British Isles and the Atlantic coast of Europe. Though his principal work on the ocean is lost, something is known of his ventures through the Greek historian Polybius from circa 200 to 118 BC. Sailing from the Mediterranean Sea into the Atlantic, Pitheus stopped at the Phoenician city of Gades, which is present-day Cadiz in Spain, probably followed the European shoreline to the tip of Brittany, and eventually reached Belerium, which is another name for Land's End on Cornwall, where he visited the tin mines famous in the ancient world. He claimed to have explored a large part of Britain on foot. He accurately estimated its circumference as 4,000 miles. He also estimated the distance from North Britain to Massalia, which is Marseille, at 10,050 miles, which is 1,690 kilometres. The actual distance is 1,120 miles, or 1,800 kilometres. So he's not bad there, just 110 kilometres off. He visited some northern European countries and may have reached the mouth of the Vistula River on the Baltic Sea. He also told of Thule, the northernmost inhabited island, 6 days' sail from northern Britain, and extending at least to the Arctic Circle. The region he visited may have been Iceland or Norway. His comments on small points, e.g. on the native drinks made of cereals and honey and the use of threshing barns, which contrasted with open-air threshing in the Mediterranean regions, shows acute observation. His scientific interests appear from his calculations made with a sundial at the summer solstice, and from notes on the lengthening days as he travelled northwards. He also observed that the pole star is not at the true pole and that the moon affects tides. End quote. Okay, so now we're just going to look at this next article I've found. This is from the Geographical Journal, written in 1898, and it's just going to flesh out the journey of Pitheus. So let's take a look. Quote, Britain in the 3rd century before Christ was almost in a state of nature. The valleys were covered with primeval forests, the lower parts were occupied by vast swamps, and it was only on the downs and hill ranges that there were gwents, or open clearings. Still, the Celtic tribes had been in possession for several centuries and had made some advances in civilization. They brought domestic animals with them, raised wheat and other cereals, and had iron tools and arms, wooden chariots with iron fittings, and ornaments of bronze and gold. Pitheus saw and made note of the farming operations and way of living amongst the natives of Cainton, which was an archaic name for Kent. Between the southeastern district and the Gwent, now comprising the downs of Wiltshire and South Hampshire, there was the great forest of Anderida, extending from Hampshire to the Medway. Pitheus would have to pass this forest on his way to the western part of Britain, the present-day Cornwall, which was called Belerion, which is Land's End, where he found the country of the tin, which was dug out of the ground in mines with shafts and galleries. The people were very hospitable, their commerce with foreign merchants having civilised them and softened their manners. The metal was carried by them in 6 days' journey to an island called Ictis, which was probably St. Michael's Mount, whence the traders from Gaul, probably the Veneti, conveyed it across the Channel and down the Rhone to Massalia. This island is described as surrounded by the sea at high water, but connected with the mainland by a tract of sand left bare at low water, so as to render it a peninsula, to which the tin was carried in wagons. End quote. Okay, so it seems that Pitheus witnessed this tin mining and the tin trade, and it sounds like it was the Veneti tribe who lived in Brittany who were transporting it from this island, which is connected to the mainland at low tide, and shipping it across to Gaul, and then from there overland to other parts of the region. Okay, so this next little article is from Roman Britain, and it's about St. Michael's Mount. So here's what they've got to say about it. St. Michael's Mount was widely known as a port and trading market from very early times. Prehistoric traders passing between the western parts of Britain and the continent would not have wished to risk the rough and very dangerous voyage around Land's End, and so sent their cargoes across the narrowest and most level part of Cornwall from the Hale estuary to St. Michael's Mount. By the 1st century BC, the dominant traders at St. Michael's Mount were the Veneti tribe from southern Brittany. In 56 BC, they fought and lost a major sea battle with Roman forces under Julius Caesar, which, coupled with the Roman invasion of AD 43, probably ended this lucrative trade at St Michael's Mount. In 1995, an archaeological watching brief of a sewer trench found later Iron Age pottery of the Ichthys period, and its distribution drew attention to a group of 6 possible roundhouse platforms, perhaps the site of Ichthys itself, on the southern eastern slopes of the mount. A Neolithic flint arrowhead, circa 3500 BC, was also found, adding some support to the suggestion that somewhere as dramatic as the mount, whether rising from the sea or forest, would have been from earliest times a central place of authority similar to Carn Brea, the Neolithic hilltop enclosure near Redruth. While Ichthys is widely accepted to have been an island somewhere off the southern coast of what is now England, scholars continue to debate its precise location. Candidates include St Michael's Mount, and Looe Island off the coast of Cornwall, the Mountbatten Peninsula in Devon, and the Isle of Wight further to the east. Ichthys or Ichtin is or was an island described as a tin trading centre in the Bibliotheca Historica of the Sicilian Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BC. In particular, Diodorus, a Sicilian Greek historian, writing in the first quarter of the 1st century AD, gives an account which is probably a description of the working of Cornish tin by streaming from the rocks about the time of the voyage of Pitheus, and how it was carried over to St Michael's Mount. He says, quote, "The inhabitants of that part of Britain which is called Belerion, that is to say Land's End," Diodorus says, "are very fond of strangers, and from their intercourse with foreign merchants are civilised in their manner of life. They prepare the tin, working very carefully the earth in which it is produced. The ground is rocky, but it contains earthy veins, the produce of which is ground down, smelted and purified. They beat the metal into masses shaped like astralgi, which are knuckle bones, and carry it off to a certain island off Britain called Ichthys. During the ebb of the tide, the intervening space is left dry, and they carry over to the island the tin in abundance in their waggons." In a later passage in the same context, Diodorus says, "Here then the merchants buy the tin from the natives and carry it over to Gaul, and after travelling overland for about 30 days, they finally bring their loads on horses to the mouth of the Rhone." Diodorus mentioned both Marseille and Narbonne by name as places to which Cornish tin was sent on the Mediterranean coast. Probably the tin was shipped to Gaul by the Veneti, a powerful seafaring people who inhabited southern Brittany. The Veneti had close linguistic and cultural contacts with Cornwall. Their ships were described by Julius Caesar, who fought a naval battle with them in 56 BC. They were built solidly of oak, with high prows and leather-brown sails. Julius Caesar was the last classical writer to mention Cornish tin, probably because the tin trade was ended by the defeat of the Veneti, and the Romans had discovered the other sources of tin in Spain. Ireland was also rich in gold and copper, and the Irish traders would have found transport by sea much simpler than the journey along the tracks through the almost impassable forests and swamps of England and Wales. Dr. H. O'Neill Henkin, in his book Archaeology of Cornwall and Sicily, published in 1932, suggested that by the Iron Age the island off St Michael's Mount would have become a highly important port. End quote. And here is just a map showing St Michael's Mount here in relation to the rest of Britain, and just a close-up satellite image. You can see there's a bit of a spit of land there which is connected to mainland off low tide. And then if we go to the next couple of pictures here, a close-up, you can see the path there just under the water as the tide's either coming in or going out. And then we've got a bit of an aerial view there, so you can check that out. So we've got mention of the Veneti again. They seem to be inhabiting this island, whether it was St Michael's Mount or somewhere else, and they were shipping it over to Brittany. So we're going to look at the Veneti again down the line, because they seem like an interesting group of people. Caesar writes about them. They had a large fleet. They were merchants. They were involved in the tin trade. So I'm wondering what kind of influences they've had on their culture there. So we're going to investigate that further down the line. I just want to introduce you to somebody called Dr. Caitlin R. Green. We're just going to have a look at Dr. Green's bio here. So this is what she says about herself. Hi, welcome to the personal website and blog of Dr. Caitlin Green. I'm a historian / archaeologist and writer whose professional interests lie in the history, archaeology, place names and literature of late Roman and early medieval Britain. Up until recently, I was engaged in research at the University of Oxford, where I gained my doctorate a while back, and I have written a number of books, articles and various other things over the years. I'm currently a tutor at the University of Cambridge Institute of Continuing Education and a fellow of the Societies of Antiquaries, end quote. Okay, so she's been looking into a lot of these place names and also some of the coins that have been found to see if there are any links to the Phoenicians. So here's an article she wrote in 2015. I'll leave a link to her website so you can check it out. And I might actually reach out to her and see if she would be interested in discussing this on the channel. If that's something you think that would be interesting, please let me know in the comments. Okay, so this article is called Thanet, Tanit and the Phoenicians. Place names, archaeology and pre-Roman trading settlements in eastern Kent. Recent work suggests that the name of the easternmost part of Kent, the Isle of Thanet, is one that is of considerable potential interest, being indicative of a major pre-Roman trading settlement founded by Phoenician merchants from Cadiz and Carthage. The following post offers some more details and thoughts on this intriguing possibility. Although no longer an island, Thanet was one right through to the end of the medieval period, until the once-some channel finally silted up, and its name is recorded in a variety of sources from the 2nd century AD onwards. Early and significant forms of the name include Ptolemy's Tornatis, circa AD 150, Solinus's Tenatus, circa 3rd century AD, Bede's Thanatos from AD 731, the Old English Tenid and Tenet. Evidence in charters and other documents, including charters of AD 679, 689 and thereafter, and the Old Welsh forms Tanet and Danet found in the Historia Brittonum from circa AD 829 and Arms Prydain from AD 930. The usual explanation of this name is that it derives from one of two well-known Celtic roots, either tan, which means fire, or tan, T-A-N-N, which means oak, so that it would mean Fire Island, place of fire, perhaps in reference to an unrecorded Roman lighthouse or fire beacon, or Oakwood. However, as Richard Coates has observed, there are notable linguistic issues with the proposed etymologies and the suggested early forms, with the result that a Celtic root for the name cannot in fact be confidently asserted. Indeed, Coates excludes the name Thanet from his Gazetteer of Celtic Names in England and instead assigns it to his ancient category, the description of which states that it covers both Old European names and anything else not fully explicable, which must have been named before the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons, for instance, Thanet and Hawkmond. So the question becomes, what might be the origin of the name Thanet, if a Celtic etymology is seen as potentially too linguistically problematic to support? With regard to this, there is really only one credible alternative proposal that has been published, first by Rudolf Henning in the 1920s and then with considerable elaborations by Theo Veneman in 2006. Veneman argues at length that the acceptable and plausible root for the original British form of the name Thanet, according to Coates, is actually available in the Punic language via a name Itenet, meaning the Isle of Tanit, the chief goddesses of the great ancient Phoenician mercantile power of Carthage. He contends that an identical name originally applied to the island on which the Phoenician Atlantic colony of Cadiz was built, said by Pliny in Natural History to have been called by the natives the Isle of Juno, which Veneman plausibly sees as reflecting an original Punic Itenet, the Isle of Tanit, that has been subject to a clear interpretatio Romana, as Juno corresponds to Tanit under this, and that this name was then also applied to a secondary trading colony established in Britain from Cadiz, in a similar geographic location and as a result of Carthage's mercantile colonial activities in the Atlantic. Needless to say, this is a fascinating possibility, and it is arguably nowhere near as incredible as it might seem to be at first glance. On the linguistic side of the equation, it is worth noting that Richard Coates has briefly returned to the name Thanet since Veneman wrote and comments as follows, quote, Veneman explores the possibility of a Proto-Semitic origin for Thanet, I myself mentioned that such a possibility had been suggested in the past, but did not pursue it. In a paper whose main topic was the alternative recorded name Ruohin, or the like, Veneman's more sophisticated work on this persuades me that I have missed an opportunity. He concludes, arraying a great deal of evidence which I have no space to repeat here, but the name enshrines that of the Phoenician goddess Tanit. End quote. Such a positive reaction to the linguistic case on offer from a leading English place name specialist is, of course, interesting. Moreover, recent work on British place names suggests that Thanet may not in fact stand alone, and is instead one of a small number of obscure and difficult names from Britain that could potentially have Proto-Semitic or Punic roots. So, for example, Ramehead in Cornwall is an Iron Age promontory fort that guards the entrance to the large, natural deep-water harbour of Plymouth Sound and the associated Tamar Estuary Iron Age coastal node. This name, Rame, in 1086 and thereafter, is, according to Oliver Padel, completely obscure and unexplained, with no convincing explanation possible in either Cornish or English. However, it has been pointed out that there may well be such a potential and appropriate explanation available in Proto-Semitic via the Semitic height word Ram, as found in the modern place names Ramat Gan, Israel, and Ramallah in Palestine, which would fit this imposing, conical-headed well. Similarly, it has recently been argued that a handful of British island names may derive from various Proto-Semitic roots that seem to be both topographically or otherwise appropriate to the sites in question, and elucidate previously inexplicable names. Thus, the island name Sark refers to the easternmost and outermost island of the Guernsey geological group of islands, and while its source has been considered unknown and left unexplained, in the past a potential explanation is, in fact, available in the Proto-Semitic word Sirk, which is redden, rise as the sun, east. Compare Arabic, Sark, east. Needless to say, such an origin would not only explain the form of the name, but would also be topographically and semantically appropriate. Other instances of British islands bearing names that could likewise derive from Proto-Semitic include the difficult Welsh island name Ecri in the Severn Estuary, which in English is Flatholm, the last inhabitable island met as one journeys up the Severn, which has a potential Proto-Semitic origin in the name meaning the rearmost island. The unexplained name of the Isles of Scilly, which could reflect Proto-Semitic or Hebrew Sela, rock, and thus be a name meaning the rocks. Note that the C in the modern name is a post-medieval innovation. And several islands off the west coast of Britain, including the collective name Hebrides, which either means the Sheep Islands in Proto-Semitic or is impossible to satisfactorily explain. Obviously, the suggested Proto-Semitic etymologies for these other coastal names are themselves open to debate, and potential alternative explanations might be advanced for them, with a greater or lesser degree of plausibility. However, what matters is not any individual name, but rather their collective weight, and the fact that a Proto-Semitic or Punic origin both appears to be at least possible and appropriate for a small but significant number of otherwise very difficult British coastal names. In other words, when taken together, these names would seem to offer an important potential linguistic context for a derivation of the island name Thanet from Punic Itenet, which means the Isle of Thanet. If there is therefore a credible linguistic case and possible context for a Punic origin for Thanet, what then of the historical and archaeological context? Certainly there is a small amount of well-known textual evidence that might have some bearing on this, not least the classical references to a Carthaginian explorer named Himilco. Himilco undertook a maritime expedition with hints of colonisation north from Cadiz and the Pillars of Heracles, sometimes just after 500 BC or thereabouts, and it is thought that he visited Britain and Ireland as part of this. Similarly, Strabo in Geography mentions the important ancient tin trade with the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands, which have often been credibly identified with either the Isles of Scilly or Cornwall, and goes on to state that, in former times, it was the Phoenicians alone from Cadiz who carried on this commerce. Such historical hints of a degree of contact between the pre-Roman Britons and Phoenician traders and adventurers from Cadiz and Carthage are obviously few and far between, but they cannot be dismissed entirely, and they undoubtedly provide a potential historical context for the suggested derivation of a number of British coastal names from Proto-Semitic or Punic, as Veneman, Coates and Broderick have all observed. However, they do not stand alone in this. In this light, it needs to be remembered that a significant number of Carthaginian coins of the 4th and 3rd centuries BC are, in fact, now known from Britain. In the past, these have sometimes been dismissed as chance losses by modern collectors, but this no longer seems like a credible solution, given the number of coins involved, the long period over which they have been found, and their distribution within Britain, amongst other factors. Instead, it is now usually thought that while some of the coins may have arrived in Britain during the Roman period or the modern era, a great number of them are actually likely to have arrived during the pre-Roman Iron Age. The above is obviously a point of considerable importance in the present context, and matters become even more suggestive when one turns to look at the distribution of these coins on the map included here. There is, for example, a clear concentration of Carthaginian coinage along the southern coast of England, especially around the major Iron Age port of Poole Harbour, the site of the only excavated Iron Age harbour piers or moles in Britain. These two apparently monumental structures date from the 3rd century BC and were clearly well built and substantial, up to 160 metres long, 8 metres wide, and with paved stone surfaces of creamy white Purbeck marble. The piers together extended out onto the deep water channel, narrowing its entrance and thus enabling the control of access to the harbour within. Similarly, other significant concentrations of Carthaginian coins are easily discernible in and around the Severn estuary, in the northwest, at the important pre-Roman trading site of Mayles on the Wirral, Cheshire, and in the Thames Valley, all plausible sites for early maritime traders to have visited. However, the most impressive concentration of Carthaginian coins in Britain is undoubtedly that found in eastern Kent, including the Isle of Thanet, where far more of these Mediterranean coins have been found on multiple sites than is the case anywhere else in Britain. Needless to say, such a coincidence of evidence is astonishing. By far the greatest concentration of Carthaginian coinage in Britain occurs in just that area of the country where a linguistic case has been independently made for the possible presence of a trading settlement in Britain that was used and named by Carthaginian merchants. In such circumstances, it is hard not to see the coin finds as offering a substantial degree of support for Veneman's etymology and interpretation of the name Thanet. In conclusion, although at first glance it might seem to be rather incredible, there does in fact appear to be a reasonable outline case to be made for Thanet having been the site of a pre-Roman coastal trading settlement that was used by Phoenician traders from Cadiz and Carthage, and named by them after their home island at Cadiz, Itanet, the Isle of Thanet, as Veneman suggests. The linguistic case for a derivation of the place name Thanet from Itinet appears to be credible. There is a linguistic context for the derivation in terms of a small number of other difficult and inexplicable coastal names from around Britain that similarly might be appropriately explained via Proto-Semitic or Punic roots. There are hints in the literary sources of Phoenician-Carthaginian contact with the pre-Roman Britons involving trade and exploration, and there is now a substantial corpus of Carthaginian coins known from Britain that seem to be largely focused around key coastline and riverine sites, with by far the greatest concentration of this material being found in the vicinity of Thanet itself. Needless to say, no one would wish to claim that the case is certain, and further archaeological evidence would be very welcome. But the coincidence of evidence is arresting, and the case is, at the very least, worthy of some serious consideration." End quote. So there you go, that was a bit of information there from Dr. Caitlin Green. She certainly thinks there's a good case for it. I'm actually going to reach out to her to see if she's interested in coming on the channel so we can ask her some questions and hear what she has to say about this and if there's been any further developments, as this was written in 2015. And that's going to wrap us up for the Phoenicians in Britain. I'm obviously going to do some standalone videos looking at the Veneti. Next, we're going to be moving on to some mythological comparisons between the Celtic mythology and the mythology of the Mediterranean. We might start with the concept of the muse, the Welsh awen. I've also done quite a lot of work on Maeve from the Irish mythology as well, so we'll just have to see which one gets done first. Probably Maeve, actually, because I've done quite a lot on that already. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed that little look following the thread of the Phoenicians in the British Isles. There's obviously quite a lot of evidence to support the possibility. As Dr. Caitlin Green said, some more archaeological evidence would be nice. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Oh boy.